Welcome to this video about academic writing from the English editing department here at MDPI. My name's Martin Rittman, and today we're going to look about how to construct the perfect sentence. So this is the third in a series of 4 short videos. In the first one we looked at what to consider before you start writing and the overall structure. In the second one we looked at paragraph structure and the building blocks that go into there, and today we're going to look a bit more about sentence structure. So this is the main message I want to get across. So from Albert Einstein, he said, if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough. And you may have come across this moniker as well, keep it simple, stupid. So when we're writing academic work, the aim is not to confuse the reader, it's not to show off with long words and jargon. The aim is to communicate knowledge, and communicate knowledge which is unfamiliar to the reader. So you want to keep it simple, and I'm going to go through just a few ideas and ways to make your writing a little bit more simple, easier to read, and so that the reader's going to get your ideas immediately. So this is an example of actually some pretty poor writing. I took this from a recent publication, and I'm not even going to tell you which one it is, because what I've done is I've mangled the text, I put some errors in here, and I've removed all of the sentences. So if you maybe pause the video and read through this, you'll realise that it's actually incredibly difficult to follow and doesn't make much sense. So we're going to have a look at how to improve that, and the first thing we're going to look at doing is how to split it up into sentences. So a rule of thumb that you can use is one idea per sentence, or one concept per sentence. So I've highlighted in red and blue here the different concepts that I identified. Now you may see things slightly differently from me. For example, the last two you might combine into one, but there's no hard and fast rules, but in principle you should have one idea for each sentence that you want to write. So here I've just separated them into different paragraphs, but of course that's for clarity, so that you can see how each sentence looks, but of course this is all part of one paragraph. So the second thing we're going to look at is subclauses. So if you read the first sentence here, it says the use of forest biomass as a primary source of energy has, as a result of the massive use of fossil fuels, including coal, natural gas and so on, decreased in the past century. The problem here is that you're putting too much information into the reader's mind at once. They're having to remember about forest biomass, primary source of energy, and what's going to happen to it, while you're feeding them information about the reason for this decrease. And then you come back to the decrease afterwards. So in terms of the logical flow, and so you don't confuse your readers, it's much better to put this at the end of the sentence. There's another example further down that if you want to, you can pause the video and check. So here we've put this this subclause, as a result of the massive use of fossil fuels, at the end of the sentence. Because now you introduce one idea, and then you introduce a reason for that idea within the same sentence. Now you can see in red I've added another subclause, because subclauses are not always bad. Here we just add a short clarification. So the use of forest biomass or wood treated as a fuel source as a primary source of energy has decreased in the past century. And you can see we've put this subclause within commas, because you could take it out of the sentence and the sentence would have the same meaning, but it adds a little bit of clarity. So I would recommend that you be careful about when you use subclauses. Try and put them at the beginning or the end of the sentence where possible, so that you don't interrupt the reader's flow while they're reading your work. So just to summarize, subclauses can be useful to add small amounts of additional information. Try moving them to the beginning or the end of the sentence, but the danger with them is that they can disrupt the logic or the flow of your sentence. So next we're going to just have a look at the objects and pronouns. So for example, in the second paragraph here we read that although recognition of the need to reduce our dependence and to meet emissions commitments and so on. Well, our dependence on what? It's not really clear. There's an object missing in this case. And let's go to the very last paragraph. It says it is expected to be an important energy resource in the near future. Well, what is expected to be an important energy resource? It's not very clear from this sentence when you read it in isolation. And even if you read the previous paragraph, it's not very clear. So I would replace, you need to replace these and add some clarification, some extra words. And I wouldn't worry too much about repeating words if it's necessary. Sometimes people insist that you only use a subject or an object once within a sentence. I think it's fine to repeat words. I don't have a problem with it when it makes it clearer. So here we've added dependence on non-renewable sources. In this middle case, actually, the forests wasn't at all clear from the original, and here we just clarify that we're talking about forest biomass, which is the energy resource. And when you've written something yourself, sometimes it's difficult to realize when things are missing. So a piece of good advice is to write something, then maybe leave it for 2 or 3 days and then read it again and see whether it's still as clear as you thought it was originally. So just to summarize, is it clear what pronouns refer to? Have you defined all of the subjects and indeed the objects in sentences? And don't worry about repeating words when it adds clarity. This is academic writing. We're not writing something that's very stylistic. The main aim is to clearly get across the information that you want the reader to know. And so next, check the logic and links of your writing. So I've just highlighted a few short phrases and words here that suggest a logical progression. And I think some of these are fine, like the first one, as a result of the massive use of fossil fuels we discussed earlier. This is a reason for the first part of the sentence. It adds some additional information. The second one for me is a little bit more problematic, although suggests something that's entirely the opposite of what came before it. And in this case, I don't think it's necessary, and you can take this word out. Similarly, the so further down, so forest biomass is a potentially significant source, and so on. If you read this paragraph carefully, you'll realize that actually what comes in this sentence does not follow immediately from the previous sentence. There's actually new information in this sentence. So if you use words like so, thus, or therefore, it suggests that you're reaching a conclusion from the information that came before. And that's not the case here. So this so is not the right word to be using in this case. Similarly, at the end of this sentence, consistent with forest's ecological and economic importance. To be honest, in my opinion, this doesn't add any information to the sentence. It kind of confuses readers because they're wondering who thinks this is important, and it doesn't add something to the argument. So my suggestion would be, if it doesn't add to your argument, just leave it out, just take it out. And very often when I edit my own work, half of it is removing words and phrases that I added for some reason when I wrote the work, but are not necessary anymore. So you will find when you go through this process, very often it's shorter than what you finish with is shorter than what you started with. So here is, and we see that in this case. So we can see that the next slide here, where I've this is the original, and then this is where I've changed it, and it's shorter. And I actually combined these last two sentences as well, using so, because this is a deduction from what came before. Going back to the previous video about paragraph structure, I felt that there was a couple of things missing in this paragraph, so I've actually added an extra sentence to say that there might be an increase in the use of forest biomass near the beginning, because this was introduced at the very end of the paragraph. But I think it's much better to give the readers the information up front. So this was my opinion on the fact that we need an extra sentence in here. And I also just added a bit of clarity that in order to reach the targets, forest biomass is a potentially significant source of renewable energy. To me, this just added clarity to the paragraph and why forest biomass is becoming significant. So questions that you can ask yourself when you're looking at the logic and linking words within your writing is, firstly, can you remove this word? Is it really necessary? So words like however, although, but, therefore, even and. If you don't need it, get rid of it, because this makes words like this can often disrupt the flow of the reader, and they're thinking about whether these things really connect rather than taking in the information that you're giving them. Of course, sometimes they are necessary, and when they are necessary, you can ask, does the logic work? Is this really the correct word that I've used in this context? And of course, going back to the last talk, how is my paragraph structure as well? So that's a few things that you can do. Just a few further suggestions for where you can take your writing. So count the number of commas in your work. And commas typically separate ideas or concepts in writing. So within English, I would really recommend that you use as few commas as possible, because then you're presenting as few ideas as possible to the reader at the same time as possible. And with fewer ideas, they will understand those ideas more immediately. Mix long and short sentences. That can make some points stand out. This is more of a stylistic suggestion. As an exercise, try turning sentences round. If you've got several different clauses, try putting them in a different order and see what the effect on how you read the sentence is. It can be a useful exercise to do. You can imagine that you're explaining your work to a family member, a friend, or a colleague. This will help with the logical flow and identifying which concepts you really need to put into your sentences, where you need to add an extra clause for clarification, or where they're being sent in too many different directions at the same time. And where possible, ask someone else to read your work. They will give you really valuable feedback. Ask them to highlight where they were a little bit confused, maybe where they had to read a sentence 2 or 3 times to understand what you meant, and that's where you need to edit. And you can also ask them for the positive things that they see in your work. So I wish you well with your own writing. This is a reminder that this video is supported by MDPI English editing, and if you need assistance with your English editing, we can provide fast, accurate editing by our team of experienced English-speaking editors, and you can find further information on the website in the middle of the page there.